So the Master Gardener program, a lot of people think that you have to be an expert on a gardening topic to become a part of it, but really we're people who love plants or love learning and want to make a difference in our community.
I had always had an interest in gardening, but I finally decided to act on it and get a little bit more involved after I got my first home. My favorite aspect is talking to new and novice gardeners and trying to get them interested in it the way I started out.
Master Gardeners are a part of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and they're really helping their communities by building knowledge and also increasing access to different types of plants through their plant sales, or maybe educating people through their demonstration gardens.
The education that comes out of interaction with other master gardeners, volunteering in the gardens, as well as participating in the education sessions is what I look forward to. So if you love nature, you want to make things better in your community, in your backyard, this is a very good program to help you do so.
To become a Master Gardener, someone has to go through the Master Gardener training. One of my favorite parts of the Master Gardener training is when everybody comes to Iowa State University, and we call it Class on Campus. And it's such a fun day because people really want to be there. They just want to learn more.
One of the main reasons I started with the Master Gardener program was because I really wanted the education. I learned from the people and they learned from me, so we share all the knowledge that we gather.
With the self-confidence of learning more about things and trying different things, I'm more educated. I can kind of pass that on to my kids, and it's fun to be able to give back.
Master Gardener volunteers are amazing. They're these people who build partnerships and get things rolling in their community, whether it's volunteering as a Master Gardener as part of the county fair, or supporting 4-H youth who are really interested in vegetables or some other types of plants. Master Gardener volunteers can be a part of these different types of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach programs to really work as volunteers to extend the mission of Iowa State University Extension and Outreach.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Siouxland Garden Show. We are so excited to have you. Today we're going to be learning a little bit about tapping maple trees with Shanna. Really quick here, I'm going to pull up our welcome PowerPoint. All right, so really quick, I want to invite everyone to go ahead and join us in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. And then also if you're a Master Gardener. We were able to kind of broadcast the virtual Siouxland Garden Show across the country this year, so we're excited that we're going to be having a lot of folks joining us from outside of Iowa and Nebraska this year. So feel free to jump into the comments if you're watching on Facebook Live. Make sure to like and share our videos so that you can share with other folks in your area as well. This year we have a ton of great topics to look forward to. We're going to be hosting virtual series every Friday until March 26th. So make sure to join us at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Central Time. Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about roses and garden myths. So feel free to join us. You can always find our sessions on Facebook, and you can also find them on our Siouxland Garden Show website. So if you ever have trouble finding them on Facebook, feel free to jump over to the website for that information as well. Really quick, I always like to acknowledge the Siouxland Garden Show committee that helps put together this show. This is a collaborative effort between Iowa State University Extension and Outreach in Woodbury County, as well as Nebraska Extension in Dakota County. So it's comprised of Extension folks as well as Master Gardeners that chair on the committee as well. We have Carrie King, Carol Larvick, Molly Hewitt, myself, Caitlin Brinkerhoff, Kevin Pottabaum, Emily Yockey, and the bottom three there are Master Gardeners. We have Rex Towns, Randy Burnite, and Diana Kincaid. So this committee works very hard at putting together the in-person garden show as well as the virtual garden show as well. So we had to make that tough decision back in about September to stay virtual for 2021, but we were looking forward to being back in person 2022. So we want to make sure that everyone saves the date for the 2022 show. We're going to be getting together Friday, April 2nd and Saturday, April 3rd at the Marriott Center in South Sioux City, Nebraska. So it's 2 full days that you guys can come out and shop from all of our great vendors, hear all these educational sessions in person, enjoy all kinds of fun stuff out there. The admission into the garden, the Siouxland Garden Show in person is $5, and children 12 and under are free. We want to thank all of our volunteers and vendors. We have so many wonderful Master Gardener volunteers that help us put together this show. We have almost over 70 that join us every in-person garden show to make sure that we have a successful event, as well as over 40 garden vendors that come out and help educate the community, as well as supplying us with all kinds of fun stuff like plants and garden ornaments. So thank you, and we are looking forward to getting back together in 2022. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsors. The Siouxland Garden Show wouldn't be possible without them. So today our session is sponsored by the Iowa Master Gardeners, since Shanna is a Woodbury County Master Gardener. So in-house, we are sponsoring her. So big thank you to all of our sponsors. You'll be hearing from them throughout all of our sessions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull Shanna onto screen here, and we will get your PowerPoint all up and going.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. We're so happy to have you here. So I'm going to go ahead and add your PowerPoint, and the stage is yours. So I will go ahead and turn off my camera and mic.
All right, thank you. Well, my name is Shanna Mueggenberg, and I am thrilled to be here today. I live in a small homestead here in the Sioux City, Iowa area, where my husband and I raise goats and chickens. We manage a small orchard and have a large vegetable garden. And we just have a lot of diversity on the homestead. And one of our undertakings every year is maple syrup production. So today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how to produce maple syrup in your own backyard. So a brief history of maple sugaring in the U.S. This could be a whole hour-long presentation in itself. There's a really rich history with maple sugaring on this continent. Native Americans first made sugar, of course, centuries before Europeans ever arrived. Early settlers increased the sugar production with the metal drills, spouts, buckets, and evaporators. Maple syrup was the primary sweetener for farm families in the 1800s. And back in the 1800s, the U.S. syrup production was double what it is today. And the reason for this was because every family farm also produced maple syrup. It was just part of their farm practices. Maple syrup in the United States really reached its peak during the Civil War, when the North refused to consume sugar produced in the southern states and in the Caribbean. And then the Industrial Revolution happened, and there was this huge migration from the farms into the cities, and that's when maple syrup production decreased. So how do you know if you have maple trees in Iowa? Well, you can see on the bottom, I've kind of have little pictures. These are from the ISU Extension and Outreach site. If you don't live in Iowa, you can absolutely go to your local Extension and Outreach site, and they'll have a lot of resources for you to kind of determine what kind of trees are in your area. If you're not in the Siouxland area, once again, I really encourage you guys to let us know where you're at. We'd love to know how far away this video is reaching. But the number one thing I get when I tell people that I harvest maple trees is that you can't do that in Iowa. And I always just kind of laugh, and I think, well, my pantry filled with jars of maple syrup beg to differ. I can do that in Iowa. And the reason people tell me I can't is because they're convinced that we don't have enough sugar trees in Iowa to be able to produce maple syrup. Well, good news, you don't have to have a sugar maple in order to produce maple syrup. Any maple tree does produce a sweet sap. Sugar maples generally have the highest volumes and the concentration of sap. And you can see on the bottom that they're mostly on eastern Iowa. There's also black maples, which are fantastic for syrup production. And the most kind of common maple, the ones that I harvest myself, are the silver maples. They're very fast growing, but their sugar concentration is a little bit lower than the sugar tree. So you just need to boil it a little bit more to get to that sap or the syrup consistency. They also tend to bud out earlier than the other maple trees, so the sugar production time period is a bit shorter than with other maple trees. But like I said, those are the trees that I harvest from, and I'm very satisfied with the quality of my maple syrup. But what are you going to do if you don't have any maple trees in your backyard? Well, don't you worry, because you have options. Believe it or not, you can also tap walnut trees. They are, however, a nut tree, which means that people with nut allergies may have a reaction to that syrup. And I also just kind of always caution people, the black walnut is the most valuable tree in Iowa, so you might want to consider that before you start drilling holes into it. If you're planning on selling that tree to a lumber yard down the road, they're not going to be too thrilled with the sap stains in the wood. So potential economic decision there. There's also butternut trees on eastern Iowa, and those are also able to be tapped as well. They are, however, really at risk for a fungal disease. And if you're going to tap them, you just really have to take special care to make sure that you're protecting your investment. Additionally, we have some birch trees in some small parts of Iowa. Those can be tapped as well. Their tapping season actually starts after the maple season ends. It's a continuous flow, day or night. And the taste is different than maple syrup. So some people like it, some people don't. If you have a birch tree, feel free to give it a try and see if you do. I also recommend that if you're tapping a birch tree, you use a stainless steel tap. And that's because just the sap on the birch tree can break down galvanized metal or plastic, and it just kind of alters the taste. And finally, you can also tap your sycamore trees. They're not typically tapped because there's such a low sugar content in them, but apparently they impart a butterscotch-like flavor to the syrup. So you do have options outside of the maple trees. Today, we're going to focus a little bit on the maple trees. And the first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, is walk around your backyard and identify if you have your maples. You can identify a maple tree from the bark. I can't, which is why I just walk around in the summer and look for those distinctive maple leaves. And then you can see on this, my first year, I actually just tied string around the trees, and that way I would be able to identify what they were when it came wintertime and time for tapping. When you identify which ones are maple trees, the next step you want to decide if it's suitable for tapping for syrup. In order to do that, the diameter of the tree has to be a minimum of 10 inches for one tap or 18 inches for two taps. I don't recommend putting more two taps into a tree because it's just, it just creates a lot of stain columns within the tree, and it'll end up decreasing your overall syrup production over the years. You might get a lot of syrup this year, but next year it's going to decrease. Now, when do you tap? In Iowa, generally, the maple season starts in about mid-February and lasts for about 3 weeks or so. I am actually planning on probably tapping my trees in the next few days. So if this is something you're interested in, you guys are getting this education right at the perfect time. If you don't have any taps, you might want to hurry up and purchase some, and that way you can tap in the next few days too. So what causes the sap to flow? Well, let me say, so I always say about mid-February, but it really depends on how the weather is. So when you have freezing temperatures at night and warm temperatures during the day, it's creating this freezing and thawing effect within the tree. And this is what causes the sap to flow. The freezing actually creates this vacuum effect which pulls up the water from the ground, and then it freezes into the tree, and then it thaws the next day and the water returns to the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill a small hole into the tree and then put that tap in and then collect some of that water and then boil it down and turn it into the sap. There's a lot of things that determine whether a tree is going to produce a lot or a little of sap, everything from the size of the tree, how fast and how slow the tree froze, moisture in the soil, and what the temperatures are when it's thawing. I think even a big variable is just the shape of the tree. If you have a tree with a lot of thin branches, you're going to get much more freezing quickly than you will a tree with just this big, massive trunk that goes all the way up into the air. So what do you need to tap? You can get, just like anything else on the homestead, you can get as fancy or as simple as you want. The basics that you're going to need is you'll need a drill bit, some kind of collection device, and this is very important. It has to be a food grade device. So I use just gallon milk bottles that I clean out really good and sanitize. If you want to purchase something at the store, you're welcome to do that. And then you need the spouts, and there's quite a few varieties of spouts out there. I've tried a few myself. So this spout is the first one I tried, and this is a little plastic. Actually, I lied. This is the first one I tried, and this was kind of a nostalgic spout. This is the ones that I think about, like in Vermont with those beautiful buckets hanging off the tree, and I really wanted to kind of recreate that. My problem with this one is it ends up needing a very large hole drilled into the tree, and that just increases the risk for pathogens to enter and damage my tree. So after my first year, I went away from that one. And then I moved to this plastic spout. They're very inexpensive. And then they connect to a tubing system, which is also pretty inexpensive, and you just connect them on. My problem with these is they don't really last more than a year or two. You just can't, I never feel like I can sanitize them. And especially this tubing is very difficult to get clean. So you end up needing to replace them every few years. So my current spout that I use is a stainless steel one, which was a little bit pricey, but I'm really happy with it being stainless steel. It's very easy to clean and sanitize. And I just think it's a good protection of my investment and protecting my trees in my yard. That's it. All right, so now for the exciting part, how do you tap the trees? All right, so first thing, if you've tapped more than a couple years, you're going to want to avoid previous tap holes. Now this picture has several tap holes in it, and I'm going to challenge you just to take a moment and look at it and see if you can't find them from previous seasons. Okay, if you were able to find them, here's one, and here's another, and here's another. And it's pretty important that you identify where those tap holes are from previous years. So what happens is when you put a tap hole into the tree, a column of stain will occur about 12 inches above and below that hole. So you want to avoid it because those stains aren't conducive to tap flow. So you're really just kind of wasting your effort putting into a tap into a place that's not going to produce sap. So you just want to avoid them. So you're drilling into clear white wood. Right. When you drill the hole, you want to use the appropriate size bit. I use the 5/16 for my current tap, but that big tap I showed you earlier was a 7/16 drill bit. You want to make sure your drill bit is clean and sharp. Preferably use only for tapping trees if you can invest in your own little drill bit. And then drill straight into the tree, a depth of 1.5 to 2 inches. And that's... some people like to do an ever so slight like upward motion with the thought that the sap is going to go downstream. You really don't need to do it. Just drill straight into the tree. When we use the tubing, I prefer to attach it before I put the tap into the tree. It's very, very difficult to maneuver it onto the tap once it's in the tree. So just a little pro tip there. And when you're using a hook and attaching something with the hook, make sure that the hook is facing the correct direction. Another pro tip. And I am definitely speaking from experience when I say that I put the hook on the wrong way and then had to yank out my tap to replace it. So you're going to tap your tree, your spout into the tree with a hammer or a mallet. I prefer to use a rubber mallet because if you tap too hard, you can actually cause the tree to split a little bit. That's going to cause the tree to have to work harder to repair that hole. And then also you're just going to be losing a ton of sap from around your tap, your spout. So that's what happens if you tap too hard. If you tap too light, then the tap's not going to actually set properly, and you're also going to lose syrup or sap out the sides. So you're just going to gently tap until you hear this thumping sound, and it really does just kind of make it goes from like a tap, tap, tap to a thud, and that's pretty much what it does there, and you'll get used to that after you do it a few times. You'll become quite proficient. And then you apply your collection device. Once again, you want to make sure it's made of that food grade materials. And you really want to limit the amount of debris that can get into the lid. So either you put a lid on or you have a small opening like we do with the milk jugs, because there is debris that's going to fall into there. So it's just, you want to keep everything as clean and sanitary as possible. So I check my collection devices at least 2 times a day. If it's a very, very warm day, more than that. It's really disappointing when you go out to check your collection devices and you just watch sap that's just pouring, overflowing, and returning to the earth. And I guess the tree is going to get it back, but you're sure not going to. If you have a larger open container, I would say just remove any ice blocks that form. The sugar doesn't freeze in your sap. So if you have ice blocks that have formed in your container, just chuck them out. That's less boiling that you have to do later. And then you don't have to boil it down right away. You can store it for a few days if you keep it in a nice cool area until you're ready to process it. And then always protect your investment. You want to ensure that your tools and your taps and your storage devices are sanitized at the beginning and at the end of every maple syrup season. A big temptation is always when you drill the hole into the tree to blow into it. This is just going to introduce pathogens into that tree. And that's actually going to decrease your sap production for that season as well. And then, like I said earlier, any plastic taps and tubes, you have to replace at least every 2 years. Even with good sanitation and maintenance, they just become contaminated. All right, so that's it on kind of the steps of how to tap your trees, but that's only half of the process. We also have to get that sap from sap to syrup. And in order to do that, you're going to boil your sap, and you're going to boil it and boil it and boil it. This is, believe it or not, one of the more challenging parts of maple syrup. Is there is frequently a time where we are getting so much sap that we have to be very creative about how to get it boiled down without running out of storage space. Kind of an interesting little fact here. So this is my husband had created this last year, our little outdoor boiling area. Last year, well, my first year, we boiled all of the sap inside of the kitchen. And I do not recommend that because all of the walls of my house were just weeping water all over them. You're boiling a lot of water off and it needs to go somewhere. So if you can, definitely set up an outdoor boiling station. And if you can use a propane tank, we've done that as well. It gets a little expensive with the propane. We have a lot of wood, so we decided to burn it over top of an outdoor wood pit. The first time I did that, we didn't have the chimney in the back. So the smoke from the fire was just all kind of on top of the sap. And I was really excited. I had boiled the sap down and I brought it to work. And I knew that it was going to be, that the flavor was going to be affected by that smoke. But I brought it to work and I was giving everyone taste tests. And I said, oh, guys, try my maple syrup. And everyone tasted it. And they said, there's something wrong about that. That's not right. And I knew it was from the smoke. So then I changed the way I presented it to people. And I said, hey, you want to try my smoked maple syrup? And everybody went, wow, that's amazing. How did you get that smoke flavor in your syrup? So it just kind of always makes me chuckle. The way you present your goods has a huge impact in how they're received. So we didn't particularly like that smoky flavor to our syrup. So my husband then put together this, which has a bit of a chimney to keep most of the smoke away. And then you can see all of this here. This is just evaporating steam. So, and then the smoke comes up here through the chimney. So as you can see, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to work. All right, so while you're outside and you kind of feel like you're starting to get close to the syrup consistency, that's when I move the sap from outside into the house to finish. And I really want to do this in the house because your sap will very quickly go from sap to syrup to burnt sugar. So when I'm actually finishing my syrup, I stay right in the kitchen. I don't stare at it because, you know, it seems to go interminably long. But I'll sit there, and if I'm reading a book, I just stand right in the kitchen and read a book by a stove where I can keep an eye on it until it gets really close. I also like to filter. There's two filters that I do. The first is the mid-boil filter, and I actually will do that when we go from the outside to the inside pot. And I just filter it through a lightweight filter, and that removes a lot of what's called sugar sand, which is just like sediment that forms in syrup. It's completely edible. Some people choose not to do this because they actually enjoy eating the sugar sand. And I personally don't mind having a scoop of sugar sand at the bottom of my bottle. But if you're giving it away as gifts, generally people don't really want that. So you do a mid-boil filter, it gets rid of the majority of the sediment, and it also gets rid of any impurities that might have formed in the sap or that have fallen into your bucket. And then I do a final filter, and that'll actually, there's a few more steps before the final filter, but I do one more filter right when it reaches this finishing temperature as it goes into the bottles. Okay, so recently I invested in a hydrometer, and the first few years I kept trying to do different techniques to find out when I was getting to a syrup consistency. So finally I got very frustrated. I was not satisfied with the way my syrup would turn out. So finally I invested in a hydrometer. It's kind of a delicate instrument, but it's, and you can see there's this on the side here. Depending on what the temperature of the sap is, you can put it into a cup and then put the hydrometer in it. And this one, you can actually see there's this red line here. That's a bomb of 32. And my sap at the time was 211 degrees. So you can see it's right around the syrup consistency. So I just really like to use this tool. It just takes the guesswork out of whether or not I've reached a syrup consistency or not. You certainly don't need it. It's just, like I said, it makes my life a little bit easier, and I'm always on board with things that make my life easier. And then the most important step of any syrup or candy production is getting your taste tests by a true professional. This is my son, Henry, and my maple syrup production is a complete family affair. Everybody gets involved. Real quick, a note on food safety, and I think it's funny that I put this on a wooden spoon because I don't really use a wooden spoon in too much anymore, but earlier years I did. Only use, once again, that food grade materials. I cannot emphasize this enough. If it's not food grade material, it'll harbor bacteria, and then actually chemicals from the product can leach into your syrup, which you're then consuming. And then also make sure, don't you store non-food items in your food containers between seasons. My first year, I went to a bakery and asked them if they had any food grade buckets. And I got some great 5-gallon buckets that they had stored fondant in that they no longer needed. And I was thrilled about it. And I brought it home and I was really pleased with myself until I saw a family member using those food grade buckets for non-food grade items, and I wasn't thrilled. But so you want to make sure it's food grade, and you want to make sure everybody in your house knows that it's only for storing food. Once again, clean your equipment really, really well, but make sure that all the chemicals are being rinsed off. And then before you actually can your syrup, make sure you sterilize your bottles in accordance with, you know, your food safety guidelines. All right, the final filter. I see there's a question about what I use as a filter. You can use cheesecloth, absolutely. I actually have just purchased some maple syrup filters online, but yeah, you can absolutely use some cheesecloth. So when I filter it, I do this last one, and this is, I have the filter on a stand, and then I just put my jars underneath as the syrup goes through. Now, in order for me to safely, I guess, preserve my syrup, the syrup has to go into the jar and the lid has to be on, and it has to be 180 to 185 degrees Fahrenheit to seal the jar. So you just have to remember that if you're doing this final filter, you have to be aware of what the temperature is that's going into that jar, because filtering does cool down the syrup. You can reheat, but reheating maple syrup tends to cause, I guess, a decline in the quality of the syrup. So that's it from going from sap to syrup. And I see we have a question from Mary Mallet. I tapped our sugar maple tree for the first time last year. It was thick and almost jelly, but it was still clear and not really sweet. Did I need to cook it longer? If it was thick and almost jelly, I would say not. I wonder, I would wonder what the sugar content of your maple tree was. I'm not really sure. I think I'd have to do a little bit of research and get back to you, Mary. All right, so we'll continue on and go to storing the syrup. Now, people who do a lot of food preservation, you kind of understand there's very strict rules to safely preserve your food. And maple syrup is kind of my exception to those rules, because you put it into the jar at 180 to 185 degrees, fill the jar up so there's almost a quarter inch of headspace, add the lid and the ring, and then flip it upside down so everything gets really, really hot. And then you can allow the jar to cool, and then flip it right side up, and then the lids will depress and the jar cools. That kind of goes sometimes against what people are comfortable with, but syrup is kind of the exception to that, because syrup it boils at a higher temperature than water does. So it actually boils, syrup will boil at 7.5 degrees above the boiling point of water. And I can't tell you what temperature that is, because that's going to vary based on what your elevation is. You sterilizing the jars beforehand, and then the sugar content is so high that it really does keep, I think it can keep probably for many, many, many years. It never does in my house because it's always consumed pretty quickly. But once you open that jar, it will keep up to a year in the refrigerator. Now, there are some issues that can arise with your maple syrup. The top picture is called sugar sand, and that's that stuff that people like to filter out. It's just concentrated minerals that are in sap. Like I said, if you're trying to sell your syrup or give it away as gifts, people generally don't want it. But I've eaten it and it's perfectly fine. I don't mind it at all. If you have to reheat if you want to reheat your jars to give them a water bath can after you've canned them, you're going to get quite a bit more of that sugar sand on the bottom. So just be aware of that. White mold is also a common issue after you've canned your syrup. And it's not actually in the syrup. On top of it is the very, very thin layer of water, and that thin layer of water will get white mold. It's perfectly safe to consume. I just scoop it off with a spoon, and then you can return that syrup to a boil before you consume it if you're consuming it as syrup. Anytime I get white mold in one of my containers, I just remove it, and then that's the syrup that I'll use to make maple sugar. So that's kind of a different process, which I'm not going to go into, but you just return it to a boil and bring the sugar up to a much higher temperature, and then it turns into just a wonderful sugar, and you can use it in any recipe that calls for brown sugar. And then you can also get sugar crystals, and sugar crystals happen when you have boiled your sap down too much, and now you have a really, really thick syrup, and it's actually, there's too much sugar for it to actually like suspend in the water. So then it starts to crystallize. One year I had a lot of the sugar crystals form in my jars. And that's when I actually finally invested in the hydrometer, because I just felt like I could have gotten so much more syrup if I had just not overboiled it down. I have another question here. Does it matter which side of the tree to tap, like east side or not? So it doesn't. You can tap any part of your tree. A lot of people like to tap the side of the tree that's towards the sun, because in theory, if the side of the tree that the sun is touching first is going to start thawing faster. So they'll kind of tap their tree depending on the location of the sun, north or south. And then also a lot of people, it's a good idea if you want to maximize your syrup production, is to actually tap it underneath a big branch. And that's just where a lot more of the water will be coming down, because it's frozen all in those tiny little branches that form, and then they all have to come down, and they're all coming through the trunk beneath that branch. So that's another great place to tap. I have found after a couple of years that I am going to lose all of those prime real estate areas on the tree. So I just tap wherever I can safely put a tap on my tree. How many trees do we have to tap to get enough syrup for a good sample? Well, that's going to depend a lot on your tree. It takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And that's just the average. It can actually, depending on what your sugar content in it, it can take 20 gallons to 60 gallons to get 1 gallon of syrup. And every tree is so variable in how much it produces. I tap 8 maple trees, and it gives us enough maple syrup to just about get through the year with my family. And I do consume a lot of maple syrup. I put it in my coffee every single morning. And I think for my birthday, my husband made me a cake, and he made me some maple syrup flavored icing. And so we definitely eat maple syrup in my house. I have one tree that produces more sap than every other tree on my property combined. It's just a fantastic tree, and I desperately hope that nothing ever happens to it. So it's just, I can't tell you how many trees to tap, because it depends on what happens with the trees that you have. There's so many variables. You'll get to know your trees on your property. And then I have another question. Is the sand I talk about like what happens with honey sometimes? Well, this is my first spring that I will be raising honeybees. So I can't actually answer that, because I'm not 100% sure what happens with honey sometimes. But I can get back to you hopefully next year or the year after if my new bee enterprise is successful. So like I said, all good things do have to come to an end, and your maple syrup season is also going to end. Generally, you want to take your taps out when your trees begin to bud. And the trick with the silver maples is that they tend to bud earlier than other maple trees. People report that the budding sap has an off taste, and it might be a little bit discolored. So you just want to pull your spouts and prepare your equipment for storage. You don't need to do anything to the tap holes. The tree is going to take care of itself. So don't be tempted to try and fix the tree. It will do its own healing. I will say you can also still collect sap after it's been budded for another week or two. I'm planning on doing it this year just because I do like to consume syrup in my coffee. And so I'm kind of going to experiment this year to see, does the sap maple syrup really have such a big difference, or is it something that I can use in cooking or with other ingredients? So we'll see. And of course, the most important part of any maple syrup endeavor is you need to be having fun. I recommend you make it a family activity and enjoy the fruits of your labor. One of my favorite things about maple syrup season is it gives me an excuse to get outside and outdoors at a time of year where I am stir crazy, but it's still kind of too cold for me to do much else. So it's kind of a great opportunity for us all to just get outside and get some fresh air after a long winter cooped up. If you have any questions, these are the references I used in making this presentation, a lot with the Iowa State website, and then just a couple books. And do we have any more questions?
While we wait for questions to come in, I'm just going to go ahead and post in the comments a link to the evaluation for Shanna's presentation. We do value the feedback that you guys have for us on all of these sessions. Looks like we just had another one come in.
Do you mix the sap from different trees? I absolutely do. I mix the sap from different maple trees. And remember how I talked about how you can actually tap other types of trees? Some professional, I guess, maple syrup facilities will actually mix maybe 10 gallons of maple syrup with 2 gallons of black walnut syrup to make distinctive flavors as well. So that's also an option if you want to play with some different flavors, is to not just mix different maple trees, but different tree saps.
Awesome. We'll wait for just another minute here for any other questions. Really quick, I'd love to just show folks that might be watching directly from our website where you can find the evaluation link. If you go underneath the speakers tab when you are finished and you go into Shanna's presentation, you click there, you will find the link to the evaluation. So if you click that, it'll take you directly to the evaluation link. So again, we welcome that feedback. Looks like we got another couple questions. Shanna, I'm gonna go ahead and take my slide down. Yeah, there we go.
And yes, tapping the black walnut trees, as far as I know, would be the same as tapping maple trees. My husband and I have been having that conversation quite a bit this year about if we're planning on selling our few walnut trees to lumberers, or if we're going to give tapping them a try this year. And I think this year we're going to try tapping the walnut for the first time. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I really just want to impart to people is don't be afraid to just give it a try. It's so much fun, and sometimes we can be so paralyzed by wanting everything to be absolutely perfect that we just don't even give it a try. So please give it a try. You're going to make mistakes. I certainly still am making a lot of mistakes, but that's the way we kind of grow for them and learn. And it's so much fun. And the flavor of maple syrup that you produced yourself, I don't know if it's just the labor of love that you put into it that imparts this wonderful flavor to it, but it is just fantastic. And I really hope you guys all look forward to trying it yourselves.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shanna, for joining us today. If you guys have any additional questions for Shanna, you can go ahead and fill those out in the evaluation, and I will get them to her so she can answer them. And then Mary did post in the comments, Shanna, that she does raise some bees and that we can get you in contact with her since she's another master gardener as well in the area. So thank you all for joining us. I just want to remind everyone that we will be having another set of sessions coming up next week on February 26th. We were going to talk a little bit about roses and garden myths. And we had one more question that came in.
I see. The biggest challenge is identifying trees you can tap. Any tips? So my best tip is walk around when the leaves are on. I have a hard time identifying trees based on the bark. But yeah, if I have the leaves, it gives me a much better way to resource. And then always use your extension and outreach office. They love to get pictures. So if you have a tree that you're trying to identify, please take pictures and send it to your local extension and outreach office, and they will help you identify things. There's this incredible fount of resources here at the ISU office. that I am just privileged to be a part of helping people, but they have so many more resources beyond just us.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you join us next week for our next 2 sessions with the virtual Siouxland Garden Show. We'll see you there.
Bye, guys.